Hi there, my name is David Youngren. Today I want to talk about when faith reveals who you are. In this first segment, we're going to specifically go back and talk about some of the things that I've taught in the past about your very essence of who you are, and then we will talk about faith in the second segment. So let me begin with an old poetic text, a psalm, where it says when I consider your heavens, this is one of the writers, I think it's actually King David. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man that you are mindful of him? It's a prayer. It's an observation. It's a meditation. It's mindfulness. This writer looks up into the sky and he becomes aware of the sun, the moon. He becomes aware of the stars. He's aware of nature. And he's caught up in the vastness of it all and how incredibly beautiful it all is. And then he says, God, who am I that you are mindful of me? And as I said, it's probably King David who wrote this. It's the king. It's someone of high status, someone who has a lot of different things. And he still asks, who am I that you are mindful of me? Now, when we look at the universe, you have to understand this was written maybe almost 3,000 years ago. And people had a different view of the universe back then. They didn't have any Wi-Fi. They had no internet. They had no information. They didn't have books like we have today. They had none of that. So they didn't know how vast the universe was. They didn't understand quantum physics. They didn't understand all the things that we know today. Had very little comprehension. They just looked up and they saw. They'd never been on an airplane. They'd never been on a spaceship. They'd never seen any of that. They didn't have videos and cameras and everything else that could point up into the universe. They had none, or telescopes. They had none of that. So today we know a whole lot more. So when we think about the universe, we realize that this is an incredibly vast place. And in order to truly understand who am I, we have to understand, first of all, what the universe is, and then secondly, we understand who God is, and then we can come to an understanding of who we are. So the universe, the best way I can explain the vastness of the universe is by telling this little story about the grain of sand. A grain of sand is very small, as you know. You can hold it in your fingertips and you see it there, and you have to be so careful because you could possibly lose it. It may even get stuck on your finger because it's so incredibly small. And if you will go to your nearest beach and you would add up all those grains of sand, you would get a ton of sand, right? Like the number is just so large that it would be hard for us even to know what it is, or even know what the terminology would be. It would be past billions. It would be some trillions, zillions, whatever. And then if you would take all those grains of sand that are on your beach, you would then go and cover the entire earth, which, by the way, 1/3 of the world's land mass is made up of sand. So that's a lot of sand, right? I mean, there are some parts of the world, for example, the Sahara Desert, which this is an enormous place where all that you see is just sand, 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 and more sand. So there are lots of small grains of sand within these enormous plots of sand. And when you combine all of it on the earth, and then you multiply it by 10, you get the number of stars in the universe, which tells me that the universe is enormous. It's beyond our comprehension. It's something that is so mind-boggling to think of the universe being so vast that our minds cannot possibly conceive it. And then you think about scientists are telling us that 4.9% of the universe is made up of ordinary matter. Now, ordinary matter is the earth, the sun, the moon, you and I, your cat, your dog, your Uncle Joey, your cup of coffee, all of that, your phone, anything is ordinary matter, but it is only 4.9%. Then they say that most of the universe is made up of dark energy. Now, dark energy causes the universe to expand at the speed of light. But then there is another part of the universe which is called dark matter. Now, dark matter is invisible matter. So you have ordinary matter, which is visible matter, but then you have dark matter, which is invisible matter. Nobody really knows what it is. It's kind of very confusing to people or to scientists. But somehow or another, this dark matter is what causes life or ordinary matter to be formed. So ordinary matter forms out of dark matter, and that's how the earth began. Now that leads me to this question, what is dark matter? And then another interesting thing is they also say that in order for anything to exist, if you go into the very level of quantum mechanics or quantum physics, in order for anything to exist, there has to be an observer. Someone has to observe it, someone has to see it, otherwise it doesn't form. Otherwise, atoms do not form, that eventually forms into cells, and cells eventually forms into patterns, and patterns eventually forms into, what we are. We are, 100 trillion cells. And so it begins with an observer, someone who sees it, which leads to the question of God. Now, we have maybe a perception of God that is quite inaccurate. It's not even, spiritual text doesn't even suggest that that's who God is, but somehow or another that's how often we see him, as this sky God. He's somewhere else, he's far away, we don't know where. But when you think about the universe, the vastness of the universe, you realize he's got to be very far away, unless there's alternate universes and he is on a different dimension, which is all possible. All I'm saying to you is we don't know. So what does that mean? So what does this mean? Who is God? Well, obviously to me, it makes sense that this invisible observer that causes all life to be formed is what we call God. It could also be that this dark matter that causes life to begin is also God, because it's interesting when you read some of the spiritual texts, including the Bible, that God is referred to as spirit. Now, spirit, I understand that this was written, as I said, thousands of years ago, so they didn't understand, as I said earlier, they didn't understand dark matter and all of that. But spirit, word, or the meaning of the word spirit is actually wind or breath. You could actually say, God is breath. But we won't say that today because it makes no sense. That's why it's easy to say the word spirit, because it's a little more mystical, it's a little more, no one really knows what it is, it's more vague. But really it just means wind. You wouldn't say that God is wind. But maybe there's something deeper going on here. Maybe this spirit, this wind, this breath, which speaks of some power, some force, something that brings life. You have to understand that 3,000 years ago, when you took a breath, that was an indication of life. And so it seems a little far-fetched for us today to think that there is some deep spiritual meaning behind this, but maybe there is. Maybe what the ancient writer Paul says, in him we live, or I should say in God we live and move and have our being. There is something more to that this thing or this being or whatever, this ground of being, this source of life, is what permeates. It's that which is invisible, that which causes life, is the observer that causes life to form, that is in all things. He also says the Father is above all, through all, and in all. In other words, this very essence, this thing that you cannot see, this spirit, this consciousness, this observer is within all of us. We're just not aware of it. Now, which leads me to another description of God, that God is love. Now, what is love? Love is, I think the best way you can describe it is oneness. Because the moment that you experience love, the moment that you're aware of love, the moment that you're aware of what I call the fruit of love, which is peace, which is joy and happiness, which is fulfillment and contentment and goodness and kindness, what is it that happens? Every move that we make in unison, in every move we make toward oneness with somebody is an act of love. That's when we experience love. Whenever we push somebody away, what do we feel? We feel a sense of fear. We feel a sense of tension and stress. Whenever we embrace, whenever we love, whenever we hug, whenever we do any of that, and whenever we observe someone, whether it's at a wedding and we look at someone that we're very dear to us and we see them and we are filled with this joy and peace within us, what is it? It's love. We are taking a step toward oneness, and that is what love is. So, which leads me to the question of who am I? Now, poetic text would say that you are spirit. But let me go back and look at science again, because science, I think, has a very interesting point of view of who you are. You see, most of us, we identify with our bodies or we identify with our mind, or usually a combination of the two. But is that really who you are? Is that the essence of your being? Think about it this way. If you are your mind changes all the time. It fluctuates. So the thoughts that you had when you were 10, you no longer have. The thoughts that you had when you were 20, you no longer have. The thoughts that you had last year, you no longer have. The thoughts that you had yesterday may not be the same as the thoughts you will have tomorrow. Today, you may look at yourself and say, man, I look great, I'm wonderful, look at my great life. And tomorrow, you may look at yourself in the mirror and you're filled with rage and self-hatred because you say, I don't look the way I want to look. We have all these labels, we have all these different thoughts about ourselves, but they continue to fluctuate. We have 50 to 60,000 thoughts a day. Am I those thoughts? Am I somehow the accumulation of those thoughts? Is that really who I am? Am I my physical body? Well, science is telling us that your body changes all the time. We know that. We know that we age. We know that we don't look the same. As I said, I surely don't look anything like I did 10 years, well, maybe 10 years ago. But when I was 10 years old, I looked nothing like I did when I was 10 years old. I'm completely new. In fact, science tells me that every single part of my body, every single organ is different than it was even 9 years ago. Many things in my body changes every day. In fact, there are billions of new cells that are born every day, and there are billions of cells die every day in my body. And then they say that your skin, for example, your skin is nothing like it was 30 days ago. You have a complete new skin. Every 30 days you get a new skin. You say, well, I don't know if that's true. Yeah, you know what? 90% of the dust in your house is actually your skin. Pretty disgusting, right? But that's what they have concluded, that 90% of the dust in your house is your skin. And you can think about this when you get a tan. Have you ever gotten a tan and then you realize that in a few days it's gone? Why? Because your skin is replenished. You shed, and it's new skin that is born. So there's a dying, and there's a birth of new skin, and this continues all the time. So if I am my body that continually changes, if I am my thoughts that continue to change, there is something missing here. So who am I? You see, in the midst of all these changes, I continue to be I. Who are you? Well, in the midst of all these changes, you continue to be you. So what in you is you? What in you is you? And I would suggest to you that at the very core, you are consciousness. What does that mean? You are like that observer. You have the ability to observe reality and experience life. That is who you are. All the other things are just additions. All the other things are just external input and things that change and evolve. And, as I said, even your cells, even the atoms that you have right now could have been in your neighbor and the guy you don't like last week. So we continue to change atoms all the time. They move from one place to the next. It can even go from different planets and stars and galaxies. And yeah, you could have atoms in your body right now that was 10 years ago on Mars, planet Mars. In fact, at the core, you're just stardust. So think about that. That kind of is intriguing when you think about that. but yet you continue to be you. And what is it in you that is you? You are consciousness. You have the ability to, as I said, experience life and observe reality. That's who you are. Now, which leads me to some more spiritual texts. In poetic texts of the book of Genesis, it says that God created us. And then it says that God formed out of the dust of the ground, out of the stardust, or whatever you want to call it. He formed us into a human being. In other words, we have a body, but that doesn't mean that we have life. If you've ever been to a funeral and seen a dead body, it doesn't mean that there is life in there. But out of this body, the Bible says, or Genesis says, that God breathed into the nostrils of man. He breathed His very essence. He breathed His spirit. He breathed His consciousness into man, and that includes woman, how many know what I'm talking about? He breathed His very essence into man, and we became a living being. We became a living being. So what is this essence? Well, I believe that essence is, as I said, consciousness. That consciousness is love. So at the very core, who are you? When you remove all the external voices, when you remove all the thoughts, and when you remove all the physical changes and all of that, who are you at the very core? You're a consciousness. And that consciousness is united with God, that permeates, that fills the universe. In Him we live and move and have our being. The Father is above all, through all, and in all. This is just sacred text, sacred biblical text. Paul talks about this. So at the very core, who you are is this consciousness. The very essence of God is within you. The thing that causes you to be able to observe life and experience reality is your spirit that is connected to the divine spirit that permeates the universe. Now that's who you are. That's really at the essence of who you are. So I want to conclude here today, but in the next video, I want to talk about when faith reveals who you are. And I'm going to specifically talk about the faith of Jesus. Because you may say, well, I don't know if I believe in Jesus. And some say, I believe in Jesus. And there's so much conversation back and forth. But what I'm going to share with you in the next video, I think is going to be a way of seeing things that possibly you have never seen before. Maybe you have, but I'm going to shed some light on things that I believe will help you to live your very best life, to awaken to who you are. Because once you awaken to who you are, your life is transformed. It's the key to emotional well-being, physical well-being, mental well-being. You know, there's so much fear, there's so much anxiety in the world. People are filled with tension and stress. But when you awaken to the very essence of who you are, all these other things seem to be less important. And your life is filled with so much joy and peace and a sense of love. And that's what it's all about. So would you please join me, and would you share this? Maybe you share this video with somebody else, whether you watch it on YouTube or whether you watch it on Facebook or wherever you're watching it right now. I just invite you to share this with somebody else, because I know it will be an encouragement and blessing to somebody. Thank you again for watching this.